I believe that we also could be on the cusp of a remarkable and unprecedented advance in well-being in the coming years. To my mind, one of the great accomplishments of recent 20 years of planning was China's Made in China 2025 plan that was unveiled in 2014. It had one downside: it's driven the United States crazy.
These images are from the last World Expo that took place in Osaka, Japan. Apart from the long lines and some issues in booking the access to the pavilions, the visitors were happy to wander around a global village with no wars, no conflicts, and equality for all. The next World Expo will be in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia in 2030, and it is already anticipated to be spectacular. The question is, what would it take to transform the real world into the ideal global village that emerges at a World Expo? It might be a coincidence, but also in 2030, the member states of the United Nations should have fulfilled the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The SDGs are a set of 17 interconnected global objectives established by the UN in 2015, and they are designed to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all by 2030. They address critical challenges, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. Jeffrey Sachs is a renowned professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Early this year, he outlined the 7 pillars that would allow the country to at least come close to the ideal world of a World Expo. Now, not all the countries are required to set up a plan to meet these objectives. In fact, there are some notable exceptions.
Now, I do have to say that there are a very few countries that not only have not done 4 or 3 or 2 or even 1 VNR, there are a few that have done no voluntary national reviews. Quite remarkably, of the 193 UN member states, 190 now have done voluntary national reviews, and 3 remain. It's a kind of understandable fact, but you can probably help overcome at least one of them. One of them is Myanmar, which has been so much in conflict over the years that it has not done a national review. The second is also understandable, continuing conflict. The second is Haiti, that still has not done a voluntary national review. The last one of the whole world that has not done a national review is a small country on the other side of the world called the United States of America. Myanmar, Haiti, and the United States. So I hope that the US will get it before you do the 7th VNR. And I think you could help, some guidance. Of course, the first thing we need in the United States is a BAPINAS. We don't have a planning ministry. We don't. We don't have an economy ministry. We don't have a development ministry. We don't have a planning ministry. Nobody thinks ahead. So they're not actually aware of this problem. I've tried to hint at it for the last 10 years, but so far I have not been heard. Last year, by the way, there were 5 still remaining, but South Sudan and Yemen got in front of the United States line for issuing the VNR.
And now let's hear from Dr. Sachs about the 7 pillars that would allow the country to at least come close to the ideal living experience that emerges at a World Expo.
The first and most central to the whole concept of the Sustainable Development Goals is the integrated nature of planning that spans far more than the first plans of economic development and the rise of GDP per capita and the identification of a few key sectors, but now embraces economic development, the social dimension in many ways, especially the gaps between rich and poor, the inequalities, the differences regionally, the differences between urban and rural, and the absolute central aim of universal access to quality lives and to public services. Now, with the SDGs for the last 10 years, there are at least 4 fundamental pillars of planning. The 4 pillars are the pillars of the SDGs: the economic pillar, to finally eliminate all forms of poverty, to ensure for this country that Indonesia reaches high income status, which is achievable and within reach in a short period of time, to address the other economic development challenges of a balanced multi-sector economy, as Marie was just saying. Second, the social pillar, which is core to sustainable development, reducing inequalities, ensuring universal access, ensuring gender equality, SDG 5, and other forms of reduced inequalities across the society. The third fundamental point of the SDGs, of course, is to integrate the environmental dimensions in all their forms. I doubt that this appeared almost anywhere in the early plans. Now they're at the very center of planning. We need deep transformations in land use, deep transformations in energy use, deep transformations in the chemical sector, which provides vital materials, but also toxic pollutants. And so these environmental pillar of sustainable development, we're no longer looking at simply adding capital to get growth. We're fundamentally looking at transformation to ensure that environmental sustainability is at the core of the economic and social strategy as well. The fourth pillar of sustainable development are SDGs 16 and 17. SDG 16 is peaceful and inclusive societies. And as Sherry reminded me just minutes ago, peace, justice, and social institutions that work at the core of SDG 16. And SDG 17 is global partnerships. This is a worldwide effort. So planning can only succeed in the context of global goals and global ambition. The second element of planning that I think is distinctive at this stage is the need for long-term planning. And long-term planning beyond what is also important, a vision statement. A vision statement is not a plan, but it's very important. It helps the entire society to see where society should head, and for young people to think about how they would like to fit into the future and what actions they should take, and for the businesses to understand how they fit into a changing society. But we actually now need something extremely difficult, and that's real plans over a horizon of 20 or 25 years. And this is something new and very hard to do. Why do we need such long-term plans? Think of one of the fundamental transformations that's needed today, the energy sector. We know, and I almost guarantee you, I'm ready to say guarantee you, we will have a low-carbon global energy system at mid-century. It may sound like a rash promise because a lot of conventional wisdom, certainly what the oil companies tell us is you're going to be using fossil fuels for decades to come. I think that this is actually wrong. And the reason it's wrong is that it will be understood to be far too dangerous to continue with the status quo soon enough. If eyes are open, you know it already. Los Angeles is not burning down out of a random occurrence. It's burning down because it's in a mega drought and it was primed for massive fire. And of course, we're seeing disasters all over the world as the climatologists warned us 20 years ago, and many of those warnings went unheeded, and we have arrived in extreme climate danger. And we already hit the 1.5 degree limit, which we said we would not hit in Paris in 2015. We hit it in 2024. And so the need for transformation is absolutely undoubted, in my view. And it will be seen to be undoubted. Now, changing an energy system is very hard, as you know better than anybody. When the economy depends on it, it's like a fundamental transplant of the core organ systems while keeping the patient moving and vigorous and growing and dynamic. And so this is a major challenge, and it requires at least a quarter century to carry out, because infrastructure needs to be changed, because today's vehicles on the road have a 10 or 15 or 20-year lifespan, because today's power plants are not going to be all retired early. Not at all. They're going to have their life. They will be phased out as they depreciate, as they lose their economic value, as it becomes economical to introduce the new zero carbon energy systems over time. So there will be a quarter century of rolling off the old fossil fuel infrastructure and bringing on the new zero carbon infrastructure. This needs to be planned. That's the essence of this transformation. The Paris Agreement is not very helpful in this regard, to tell you the truth, because this instrument of the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contribution, is not what we need. It's what was achievable in the negotiations, but it's not what we really need or what you really need, because that NDC encourages 5 to 10 year thinking, but you don't want to make progress over 5 or 10 years and get locked into something that is unchangeable, because the urgency will be even higher and because the technological possibilities will be even better. But whether it's 2050 or 2060, it needs active long-term planning. And so the length of time in the planning horizon in one variant of Bapinas's work needs to be a 20 or 25-year horizon. So yes, there needs to be a 5-year plan. There needs to be a 1-year budget, no doubt. But there also needs to be a 25-year plan as well. And that's a big challenge. That requires different kinds of models. That requires a lot of assessment about transformation and technological change. But it is core to the real planning process now. And it's not only the energy transformation, it's the land use transformation, it's the role of the mining sector. These are long-term changes that are needed. Of course, not to delay, but to know that they will only be implemented step by step over a period of 20 years, but they need to be implemented consistently during that period. The third element that is new in planning and that will become even more important is regional integration. And this is very hard. How to integrate your plans with the plans of other neighboring countries. It's almost not done. It's almost not even that the planning agencies get together and spend a couple days comparing their own plans, much less actually planning in a coherent regional way. But I think that this is also necessary in certain key areas, not every area, but in certain areas. The energy transformation is one of them. You cannot decarbonize the energy system one country at a time. And the reason is plain, and that is that many of the most important, lowest cost, zero carbon energy sources are not in your country, they're in your neighbors' countries. And because these are intermittent energy sources, when the wind isn't blowing here, or the sun isn't shining here, or the seasonality of the hydropower isn't working here, you need the neighbor's energy, so the electrons are going to flow in all directions depending on the day, the season, the weather, and an integrated regional grid is going to be far lower cost, far more resilient, and far cleaner than if Indonesia tries to make its own energy plans, which may lead to the conclusion we can't do this. But if you integrate the energy coming from elsewhere, then it can be done. Maybe a lot of Indonesia's power really should come from the deserts of Western Australia. The idea of the submarine cable is a good idea from what I can understand, a financeable idea, a sensible idea for regional integration. And of course, we know that the hydropower of Lao PDR is going to power Singapore by going through Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia are going to be interlinked. Now, planning that is a regional process, and of course there is the ASEAN power grid, but there isn't yet until today a regional decarbonization plan. The politicians are a bit shy of overcommitting. They don't want to commit also because they want to negotiate, which doesn't quite make sense to me, that you delay your own decarbonization because someone else is delaying. I think that that's actually a mistake, because decarbonizing earlier will be a competitive advantage, not a disadvantage. And incidentally, just to make one quick digression on that, why is China so competitive in electric vehicles right now? Well, one of the reasons is that in the US and Europe, they spent the last 10 years saying, well, maybe yes, maybe no. We don't really want to do it. It's not really going to happen. And China decided 10 years ago, we're going to do it. And now they completely dominate the international market. And of course, Tesla is a Chinese car. I don't know if Elon would put it exactly that way, at least the ones that are produced in the Shanghai Gigafactory. And so China went ahead and did this. Is it losing because it went early? No. Of course, the US and Europe are throwing up protectionist barriers in desperation right now because they missed the curve. Not because China did anything wrong, China did it right. And the US and Europe delayed and prevaricated and said, no, we're not going to do this. And now China dominates this market. So my point is, to make these transformations, which are really going to happen, you're going to have to plan regionally. And that's true both in the energy sector and also across many of the land use and marine cases. We are working in Borneo now with the scientists who are the lead ecologists of Borneo. And Borneo is 3 countries that need to cooperate to keep the island, this great, remarkable, unique biodiversity, not destroyed in the next 20 years, because it could be completely clean cut for palm oil, before you blink an eye. It's profitable to do so. It's just disastrous to do so. And so this is another example of regional integration for the riversheds, which are shared across countries, for the rainforests, which are shared across countries, for the fisheries, which are shared across countries. The fourth area that is new in planning is the blended nature of the transformation. And Marie already talked about this, and of course, UID has been, I think, the world's pioneer in pushing for blended finance. And blended finance is not only about blending finance. The reason it's blended is that the sectoral investments are also blended. The energy sector is a mix of public and private institutions. It's some private companies and it's some state-owned utilities. This is true in the mining sector. This is true in agriculture. This is true across the economy. The real economy is blended. The financing that is needed is also a mix of public and private and philanthropic finance. And the idea of the new center that was established here in your G20 presidency of a global hub for blended finance will be truly a center of excellence for the whole world, because everybody's going to have to understand how to make the financing for development. And there is no answer that it's going to come from the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank alone, or from the bond markets or from the banks. It's going to be all of the above, but not just randomly, but in a systemic way that reflects the underlying realities of these economic sectors. And so this blended nature of combining the public sector, the private sector, the NGO sector, the philanthropic sector, the academic sector, is something new also in planning. It needs to be a lot richer. Of course, Bapinas's main task is to plan the government's part of that, but you can only plan the government's part of that if you understand the complementary investments that are going to come from the business sector and from the other sectors of the economy. The fifth area that is new for planning is the crucial nature of technological change in the next 20 years. We are in the most disruptive, remarkable, I think, gold mine of technological change of modern history. Everything is moving faster than we know or than we can understand. And of course, the gains of the AI revolution were not expected at this rate even 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. There were a few outliers. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book 25 years ago called The Singularity is Near, and he was a little bit mocked. Oh, what is this singularity that's going to come? And he wrote another book just this past year. He's a senior Google advisor, and he wrote another book last year detailing that he underpredicted the pace of the arrival of the new technologies, because he said certain things would only come in 2028 that have actually already arrived, especially the large language models that came onto the scene after the 2018 revolution in design of the AI architecture, the transformer architecture. This is going to happen across the economy. And this means that economic success, even more than in the past, will mean being part of the forefront of the technological revolution. Now, this is hard for a planning agency, but it's really important to understand what are the cutting-edge technologies and make technological plans that are more central to the overall national development than in the past. To my mind, one of the great accomplishments of recent 20 years of planning was China's Made in China 2025 plan that was unveiled in 2014. It had one downside. It's driven the United States crazy. But what it really did was identify 10 cutting-edge technologies that China said are so strategic that China must be in the forefront of those technologies by the year 2025. And China made the list, and the list includes all the things we're talking about, semiconductors, digital transformation, electric vehicles, new forms of transport, precision agriculture, and so on. And you know what? 10 years onward, China succeeded. It's at the forefront of these technologies now. And it did it the right way. Hard work, lots of scientists, major investments in R&D, major advances in technology that came out of that R&D. Here, the United States has done a pretty remarkable job over the last 50 years. There wouldn't be an internet, there wouldn't be a digital age, there wouldn't be a computer age without the US role. It's strange for the US, all of it, almost without exception, was from the military sector as the mover of it, even though most of it ended up as civilian economy. But the internet, we know, was a project of the Defense Department and so forth. Okay, the U.S. is always ready to spend on the military, even if it basically is a boost for technology. But I did finally realize a few days ago, China announced that it was reaching the 50,000th kilometer of fast rail, and the U.S. has 0. And I realized it's because the Pentagon doesn't care about rail. So we've never invested anything in that technology, and we're still stuck somewhere around 40 years ago in rail technology. A sixth element of planning is diplomacy, diplomatic planning. And that's because we're in a new geopolitical era. It was simpler 20 years ago. Join WTO. That was your economic diplomacy. Now you have to navigate big power politics. And big power politics is not going to go away anytime soon. I expect, I pray that it stays peaceful, but even if it stays peaceful, it's going to be complicated. And it's going to mean that Indonesia is going to face a plethora of geopolitical challenges with China, with the rest of East Asia, India, the United States, the European Union. And that requires planning as well. Of course, it's the planning of the foreign ministry that will count the most and of the presidency, but Bappenas needs to have a sense of this diplomacy as well for its national and regional strategy. My main advice, by the way, is don't do this alone. Diplomacy, one country at a time, is just not very safe. If you can stay as the 10 of ASEAN together, basically saying to the other major powers, we'll be nice to you, you be nice to us, and we're not choosing sides. This will be the best possible route for Southeast Asia. It's feasible, but it's a challenge. And it also requires a lot of planning with this alphabet soup of trade institutions. And the seventh and obvious point that I would emphasize is all planning, in some sense, will now be digital. Digital in not only the fact that our economy will run on a digital platform, that government will run on a digital platform, but all the mechanisms of governance in terms of monitoring, in terms of accountability, in terms of performance evaluation will also be digital. But I want to end on a different note, which is that I believe that we also could be on the cusp of a remarkable and unprecedented advance in well-being in the coming years because of the remarkable new tools that we have in technology. The fact that we have a clear pathway to a sustainable energy system, the fact that we have a clear pathway to sustainable land use and food security, the fact that we can solve the ecological problems without taking a hit to well-being, but rather with a great advance of well-being. This is what is really within our reach right now. It's within our reach if we remain at peace, if we look ahead, if we cooperate, and if we follow the wisdom of Bapinas's plans. Thank you very much.